Hello. Thank you, dear Ashraf, dear Majid, for being here. Thank you for accepting to record one video in our series of podcasts in the Fintech Horizon 2020 project. And also thank you for being with us from the beginning of the project. And I would kindly ask you at the beginning to say just a few words about yourselves, about your work, and then I'll kindly ask you to answer a few questions regarding your latest work.
Thank you so much, Vasily, and good morning from Washington, D.C. So my name is Ashraf Khan. I work at the Monetary and Capital Markets Department in the IMF, where I focus on central bank governance, risk management, cash currency management, and fintech issues. And I also manage the IMF Central Bank Legislation Database.
Thank you, Ashraf.
Hello, Vasily. Good morning, and thank you for having us today. My name is Majid, and I work with ITD as a digital advisory and an expert in cybersecurity and fintech and digital risks as well.
Thank you, Majid, for the presentation. And now I would start with the first question. So I would kindly ask you both to tell our listeners a little bit about how do you think or how is fintech relevant for risk management of central banks?
Thank you. I think that's definitely a good question, Vasily. Many people think fintech is only relevant for financial institutions such as banks and insurance companies and fintech firms. But central banks and financial supervisors are affected by fintech as well. Central banks are using cloud computing solutions. They conduct extensive big data analysis, use algorithms to sieve through their own transactions. And there are also many central banks exploring fintech policy options. That could include central bank digital currencies, mobile payments, enhanced data analytics to optimize their asset management strategies. So of course, technology is not new for central banks and supervisors, but I think, the speed of developments has gotten significantly faster and the potential consequences have gotten significantly bigger for central banks. So this means that central banks and supervisors, they need to consider the specific financial and non-financial risks they themselves run that are related to fintech and cybersecurity.
Okay, thank you, Ashraf. And so basically, you start talking about cybersecurity. How does cybersecurity fit into all this new development?
So cybersecurity or security is measured by the weakest link. And this link can be within the procedures, the people, or the technology used within any organization, such as central banks. This remains true whether you're running your own IT shop or you're leveraging cloud solutions. Now, for central banks, they're embracing these emerging technologies and fintech solutions. And as they embark into more digitalization projects, their digital footprint is expanding and getting larger and larger all of a sudden. And this sudden expansion of their digital footprint is basically expanding the risk as well for these central banks. Now, why is this a concern? It's definitely a concern because any existing weakness in procedures, designs, architecture, and even the skill set within the central bank that existed years ago before this interconnected world wasn't necessarily a problem because of the limited attack surface. But with this rapid explosion of fintech and digitalization of central bank operations, now it has to be carefully considered as it's expanding their attack surface. This may be acceptable to startups with a smaller risk profile that matures gradually. However, this rapid shift in risks is of course not acceptable for central banks. There is too much at stake. So this calls for a proactive approach to strengthen the central bank security posture urgently and adopt agile procedures to maintain an upper hand on cyber and digital threats and risks, of course.
Thank you, Majid. So I know you're working on a lot of projects. So what are the findings from your outreach to central banks on risk management related topics?
Yeah, well, we've had many IMF technical assistance missions over the past years. Majid and I have personally worked on a number of them. that focused on strengthening central banks' risk management. And in those technical systems missions, we took fintech and cybersecurity aspects into account. And in the next couple of weeks, the IMF will publish a new working paper from Majid and myself with the following important recommendations for central banks. First of all, the central bank should ensure it has a dedicated independent risk management function. And that function should operate independently of business departments and of internal audit. As a second line of defense, the risk management function will help the central bank's management and the business departments to identify fintech-related risks and assist in mitigating of and reporting on and monitoring of those risks. So that's the first one. But secondly, central bank decision makers, such as the governor, the board members, executives, non-executives, as well as central bank staff themselves, should be subject to updated, let's say, fit and proper requirements, specifically focused on fintech and cybersecurity issues. Now, that includes continuous training. And in most cases, these decision makers will likely lack sufficient expertise in and experience with fintech activities. So this will kind of affect the effectiveness of the central bank's policies, their operations, and internal organization. So I think that's also a very crucial recommendation. Thirdly, there should be clear internal reporting lines on fintech issues to the board. Central banks could have, let's say, a fintech unit or a more informal fintech working group or a committee, or other forms of internal collaboration. But regardless of the organizational setup to deal with fintech issues, central banks need to find a balance between the management of fintech and cybersecurity risks on the one hand, and information asymmetries or bottlenecks in the organization on the other. Now, the fourth recommendation that we identify in our paper is that central banks should also ensure that there's an integrated fintech approach with business departments, as well as the lines of control in the central bank, in the organization. So linked to the 3 points I just mentioned, the central bank should approach any future fintech developments in a consistent and efficient manner, as much as possible, and ideally as part of its overall mid to long-term strategic plan.
Now, last but definitely not least, our fifth recommendation is to improve the cyber resiliency and security posture of the central bank's infrastructure, procedures, technologies, and the skill set within. This recommendation focuses on highlighting the importance of conducting a security posture assessment of their existing cyber resilience and identifying the technology and operational gaps, and then working on a plan to improve their overall posture. The central bank's cyber resiliency is measured by the maturity of many of their internal processes like asset change management, configuration, risk management, external dependency, and many more, like awareness of their staff. Now, the way these processes are updated to face the new reality of risks will determine the impact on the central bank's risk exposure. This is why conducting a cyber resiliency and a security posture assessment by the central bank, preferably with an independent third-party specialist, would identify gaps that needs to be addressed to be successful with the central bank's fintech adoption.
Thank you both. And I would go to more in depth, but do you think that central banks and supervisors will be able to learn from fintech and all the development in the cybersecurity domain, or are issues like the one with the Bangladesh bank unavoidable?
Well, unfortunately, incidents and breaches are inevitable in the cyber world and will happen in one form or another to any organization, now central banks included. The goal is to reduce the risk and to be ready to respond when they occur, not if they occur. To be ready, central banks basically should continuously improve their cyber resilience by adopting best practices and focusing on having the cyber risk and security discussions early in the digitalization projects when they're dealing with the projects in the beginning. This is easier said than done because of many organizations, cybersecurity and digital risks is an afterthought. But bringing the security experts, the risk managers, and the other stakeholders as well early in the process will always produce a more resilient and secure end product. So for sure, central banks will be targeted. Central banks may be breached, unfortunately. That's unavoidable. But by adopting what's called a defense in-depth approach and a threat modeling mindset, central banks can better anticipate, minimize, or even eliminate these risks and impacts. Now, unfortunately, in our experience still today, proper cybersecurity measures are often ignored until things go amiss. And then cybersecurity is looked at and measures are added.
Okay, so this field, this domain seems rather complex. So are you working with other stakeholders? So are you working with financial sector players such as fintechs, banks, or with the academia as well in assessing these risks and developing solutions?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think, like Majid just pointed out already, there are things that we recommend on involvement of third parties for specific expertise. But you have to understand, our technical assistance is predominantly focused on central banks only, and we often bring on board experts from other central banks. For instance, if we do missions to TA missions to small island states, it makes sense to bring on experts from other central banks that understand the specific fintech developments and constraints that those central banks might face. We do, however, interact with commercial banks and with fintechs in other ways. I'll give you an example. In one African country, we had meetings with major fintech companies. Most of them were startups, to have them outline their ideas and their contributions to the financial system. Now, eventually, this led to our recommendation to the central bank governor to have a recurring seminar where those fintechs could showcase their innovations, central bank staff could ask questions, and this kind of helped to bridge the knowledge gap between the central bankers on the one side, the fintech players on the other side, and also between innovation and regulation. And I think that's a very important point. Of course, in our interaction in the EU Horizon 2020 project with fintechs and with prominent academics such as Professor Giudici and Professor Duygun, that has been very helpful for us as well.
Now, in addition to what Ashraf has highlighted, we also work with other international organizations like the World Bank, United Nations, and the International Telecommunication Union on various collaboration projects to convey the importance of proper risk management and early research when adopting or building any fintech solutions with emerging technologies. Now, we're also including more fintech companies and academia in our annual and spring meeting in small focused discussions in small groups to help bridge that gap between the private and the public sector, which is much needed.
Thank you very much for these details, and I'm happy to have you both as colleagues closely working with us in this project, and I'm sure that we will have other future opportunities. And then lastly, I would like to know what will be your focus for the coming years. What are you going to focus on?
Well, much work is needed to help the financial sector understand how the threat landscape is changing significantly, and even more so since COVID-19, and then focus on how to properly respond to such revolution and such shocks to the market. This is, of course, important for fintech activities, but also for other major digitalization projects, such as central bank digital currencies, for example, CBDCs, which is certainly to keep us quite busy moving forward in the next couple of years. But in truth, we need to continue helping central banks monitor the opportunities and the risks of any emerging technology, and to help share the experience across other central banks as well.
Yeah, I think also building on what Majid just said, and I realize it sounds a bit like an open door, but especially in line with the IMF's mission, it's very critical for us to keep an open mind, for all of us to keep an open mind for people and for companies, that can make the financial sector more stable, more inclusive, more sustainable, in line with the IMF's mission. So therefore, any feedback, any input from anybody involved with fintech players or with fintechs themselves or with fintech as technology worldwide is always appreciated. And please feel free to reach out to us by any means possible. And again, we want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to discuss this with you. And we look forward to a further enhanced cooperation as well.
Thank you, Ashraf, again for your words. And definitely the door is open, and we would be very happy to have you in our future events, and also maybe to start working on the new ideas together. So thank you, Majid, also for your time and for taking your morning to discuss with me today. So from our afternoon in Central East Europe, from Bucharest, thank you again, and I wish you an excellent day ahead.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vasily.
Take
Thank you very
care.
much.